Fellow miners, welcome back. For the second part of this week's lecture, we're going to go through the semicolon and how to use it correctly. Now, there's two good things about this form of presentation. One, I'm going to go very slowly. But two, because this is a recorded lecture, you can go back and go over it as many times as you need to. Having said that, because I'm going slowly, it's just possible that it may take longer than the 15 or 20-minute increment planned, in which case, please feel free to stop and take a break and then come back if you need to. Okay, here we go with semicolons and their correct usage. Now, before we go specifically to the semicolon, we just need to recap a couple of things from part one. 1. A sentence has and needs a subject and a verb that can stand alone. If it doesn't have that, it isn't a sentence. 2. The types of clauses. A main clause or independent clause is a phrase that can stand on its own. It has its own subject and independent verb. A dependent clause or subordinate clause is a clause or phrase that cannot stand on its own. To make sense, it needs another phrase to help it. In this way, it depends on another clause. And now, semicolons. Here it is as simply and quickly as possible. A semicolon connects two main clauses, which means a semicolon connects two clauses, each of which can stand on its own. Now, allow me to elaborate. I have another way to put it. A semicolon is a hinge. Look at that. That's a hinge. I made a hinge with my arm. As a hinge, it connects two clauses that are alike. This is not to do with meaning. Grammar and mechanics, which is what we are talking about here, are cruel mistresses. Grammar especially is a cruel mistress. She does not care about meaning. Grammar cares about the grammatical units that make up a sentence. So when I say it connects two clauses that are alike, I don't mean they are alike in that they connect to the same idea. I don't mean that they are alike in that they are linked in some way that has to do with meaning. In order to determine if you need a semicolon, you need to determine if each clause is grammatically identical, if it has the same parts of a sentence. It's very important to divorce yourself from meaning here at the start. If that explanation didn't make sense, don't worry, I have another one. If you can put your thumb over the first clause in a sentence and the remaining clause can stand alone, and then you put your thumb over the second clause in a sentence and the remaining clause can stand alone, then you need to put a semicolon between the two clauses. And yes, you can have more than one semicolon in a sentence because you can have more than one independent clause connected to another independent clause. Now, watch this. Here are two clauses. I am tall, Robert is short. That's it. End of clause 1. I am tall. End of clause 1. Now look, you have subject, verb, adjective, subject, verb, adjective. These two clauses have identical grammatical elements. And we know that clauses that have identical grammatical elements are connected by a semicolon. These two clauses can both stand alone. We know that clauses that can both stand alone take a semicolon between them. You can put your thumb over clause 1, I am tall, and clause 2, Robert is short, could be a sentence. You can put your thumb over clause 2, Robert is short, and clause 1, I made a typo, could be a sentence. I am tall could be a sentence. And we know that when this is the case, the clauses take a semicolon between them. Therefore, these two clauses take a semicolon between them. I am tall. Robert is short. Semicolon between the two. Okay. Do you need me to go over it again? If you need me to go over it again, back up the film and we'll go over it again. People frequently confuse commas and semicolons, and this is in fact generally where the trouble starts. This is because the comma and the semicolon are both hinges, which means I get to make my hinge arm again. Hinge arm. But whereas a semicolon separates two alike clauses, remember, we already determined that, a comma separates two unlike clauses. And remember, this is not to do with meaning. It is to do with grammar. Grammar is a cruel mistress. She does not care about meaning. Grammar cares about the grammatical units that make up a sentence. In order to determine if you need a semicolon, you need to determine if each clause is grammatically identical. If each clause is not grammatically identical, then it is unlike, and chances are very strong that you will need a comma, because a comma is the hinge that separates two unlike clauses. If you have trouble with like, unlike, another way to understand this concept is a semicolon separates two clauses, each of which can stand on its own. A comma separates two clauses, at least one of which cannot stand on its own. And here, unless I am much mistaken, is an example. I dressed in my favorite shirt, but no one else liked it. You can tell that this is two clauses because there's a little pause between shirt and but. Simply divide it up. I dressed in my favorite shirt. This can stand alone. But no one else liked it. This cannot stand alone. It doesn't make sense without the first part of the sentence. If you have a sentence in which one clause can stand alone and the second clause cannot stand alone, you need a comma. We know the two clauses of this sentence are unalike. We know that one can stand alone, but one cannot. Therefore, these clauses should have a comma between them, because a comma joins unalike clauses, and because a comma joins a clause that can stand alone and a clause that cannot stand alone. Therefore, your sentence should be, I dressed in my favorite shirt, comma, but no one else liked it. Okay? It's okay if it's not clear. We'll just go back and we'll do it again. Now, look at this and you can see the difference. I dressed in my favorite shirt. No one else liked it. Again, You can see that there are two clauses because there's a pause between shirt and no. That's how you know that a clause has ended. I dressed in my favorite shirt. That can stand alone. It can be a sentence in its own right. No one else liked it. That can stand alone. It can be a sentence in its own right. Both of these clauses could be sentences in their own right. They are both main clauses, and they are alike because they are both main clauses. We know that the two clauses of this sentence are alike, and we also know that both can stand alone. Therefore, these two clauses should have a semicolon between them because a semicolon joins alike clauses and because a semicolon joins two clauses that can stand alone. Therefore, this sentence should look like this. I dressed in my favorite shirt, semicolon. No one else liked it. Okay? Now, before we get to the comma splice, I'm going to go over again how you use a semicolon because we've got plenty of time. Don't worry about it. A semicolon connects two main clauses. There are three possible ways to remember this. Here we go. If you want, you can remember it using the simple and most grammatical explanation. A semicolon connects two main clauses. Okay? If that is unclear, because you can't remember what a main clause is, just remember a semicolon connects two clauses that are alike, grammatically alike. It's not to do with meaning. A semicolon connects two clauses that are grammatically identical, and each is a main clause. If that doesn't work for you, you can remember a literal rule of thumb. If you have a sentence with two or more clauses, you can put your thumb over the first clause, and the second clause can stand alone. You put your thumb over the second clause, and the first clause can stand alone. You need a semicolon in between them. A semicolon connects two main clauses. A semicolon connects two clauses that are alike. A semicolon connects two clauses where you can put your thumb over each of those clauses, and the one that remains can stand alone. Okay, now we come back to the comma splice. Using a comma where you should use a semicolon is called a comma splice. And this is the single most common way of confusing where to use the semicolon. This is ironic because actually it means that the most common mistake that people make with the semicolon is not using the semicolon. So the most common mistake that people make with a semicolon is without a semicolon. The most common source of the comma splice is the word however. As in this. Oscar thought he was wrong, comma. However, he was unsure. In fact, in this sentence, you should have a semicolon between Oscar thought he was wrong and however, he was unsure. And this is because of something that we discussed in the first lecture, which is that however is a conjunctive adverb. It's not a conjunction. Okay? A conjunctive adverb starts a clause that can stand alone. So, when a conjunctive adverb starts a clause, it means the clause can stand alone. And no, I don't know why this is the case. There are some things when you teach writing where you're just like, I don't know, it's just that way. Most things I can explain. This one is like, it's just that way. Okay? When a conjunctive adverb starts a clause, it means the clause can stand alone. Let's divide this sentence up, this one that I gave you as an example. Oscar thought he was wrong, clause 1. However, he was unsure, clause 2. Once you do this, you can see that both of these clauses can stand alone. And since that's the case, they should be connected by a semicolon. Oscar thought he was wrong, semicolon. However, he was unsure. And you need a comma after however because you need to create a pause. This is true for all conjunctive adverbs. Oscar thought he was wrong, semicolon, thus he was unsure, because thus is a conjunctive adverb. Oscar thought he was wrong, semicolon, therefore he was unsure, because, because I had a brain cramp, because therefore is a conjunctive adverb. If you're genuinely not sure if you should use a semicolon or a comma, use a full stop. You never have to use a semicolon in your life if you don't want to. If you're terrified of them, if you're mystified by them, don't worry about it. Just don't use them. Use a full stop. And you will discover as soon as you put a full stop in whether you have two clauses that can stand alone. Because if you don't and you put a full stop between them, one of them will be a sentence fragment, and you will recognize that. So it's perfectly okay to use a full stop and never to use a semicolon. That's absolutely fine. Now the thing is, and this is a reason why I said that about using the full stop, however is a slippery little sucker. Sometimes it doesn't start a new sentence. Sometimes it's just a qualifier that you stick in the middle of a sentence. When we look at the stars, however, we are stunned. There, it doesn't start a new clause. Well, actually it does, but let's not get into that. Okay. The thing is, the only thing I've ever found that is a way to decide whether you need a semicolon or not is simply to say, when, however, is in the middle of a sentence, if you put your thumb over it and the clause on each side can stand alone, if that's the case, put a semicolon in front of however and a comma after. But if you put your thumb over however and they can't both stand alone, surround however with commas, which in the Renaissance period would be comma it. Surround it with commas. However is becommed. Although sometimes, to be fair, it is be semicolon, but only on one side. End of slideshow. Right, let me get out of the slideshow so that I can tell you something that's very important. And this is the thing that's very important. The thing that's very important is that I need to stop my source. Okay, whatever. Look at me. Don't look at Mikhail Baryshnikov. Look at me. Here I am. So here's what you need to know. Because now I've taught you how to use the semicolon, but I haven't exactly told you what its purpose is. Why does it exist as well as the full stop when the full stop does the same job? The answer is a semicolon connects two clauses which are independent, but they're so closely related to each other that if they weren't independent, they'd be part of the same sentence. It's just that they happen to be independent. Okay, so it's not like a sentence that means one thing and a sentence that means another thing. You can connect those with a semicolon. A sentence that means one thing and a sentence that's intimately connected to that sentence. So intimately connected that if it weren't an independent clause, it would be separated from it by a comma. That's when you use the semicolon. But please bear in mind that you never have to use the semicolon at all if you don't want to. Okay, That's it for this session. See you in an, I have to do the ending, don't I? Just a second. Okay, that's it for for this session. And just remember, who's got 2 thumbs and is teaching you how to be a better writer? This gal. But who's got 2 index fingers and is turning into a better writer? That's right, you are! See you for part 3.